राम नाम घन श्याम नाम, शिव नाम सिमर दिन रात। हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात। राम नाम घन श्याम नाम, शिव नाम सिमर दिन रात। हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात। जन्म सफल तू कर ले अपना, जन्म सफल तू कर ले अपना। मान ले मेरी बात, मान ले मेरी बात। हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात। हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात। धन्य धन्य वो भूमि जहाँ पर लिया प्रभु ने अवतार। धन्य है वो स्थान जहाँ प्रभु प्रेम का हो प्रचार। धन्य वो तीरथ जिनकी यात्रा, धन्य वो तीरथ जिनकी यात्रा मुक्ति की है बात। हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात। हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात। राम नाम घन श्याम नाम, शिव नाम सिमर दिन रात। हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात। काम क्रोध मोह लोभ छोड़ कर नाम प्रभु का गाले। मानुष तन जो पाया उसका सच्चा लाभ उठा ले। जीवन है अनमोल सी धारा, जीवन है अनमोल सी धारा। पल पल बीतत जात, हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात। हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात। राम नाम घन श्याम नाम, शिव नाम सिमर दिन रात। हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात। जन्म सफल तू कर ले अपना, जन्म सफल तू कर ले अपना। मान ले मेरी बात। हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात। हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात। हरि नाम सिमर दिन रात।
Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. This devotional song, Hari Naam Simar Din Raat, is about remembering, about chanting the name of the divine all the time. Doesn't mean that we have to stop doing everything else, but basically what it means is being aware of the divine all the time. And if we are aware of the divine all the time, we'll see the divine in everyone, we'll see the divine in all events, we'll see the divine in everything. Because it is that unseen force, that unseen hand that is behind everything that happens, everything that has manifested here. And how will it help us? It will help us by firstly not doing anything wrong, because if we are aware of the presence of the divine, we know that he's watching, and therefore we will not do anything wrong. It will also make us accept all events and circumstances as a blessing with great equanimity. And it will also improve our relationships because we'll be able to see in everyone the divine, the one with whom we have some differences is also a manifestation of the divine. He or she may be an imperfect manifestation, but then so are we. And then there were some broader implications of this which were talked about in this devotional song. Manush Janam, Manush Tan Pura La Uthale. Make full use of this human body that you have got. Body means the human body and mind, this birth. And Janam Safal Tu Karle Apna. Make your life worthwhile, fulfill the purpose of life. Because seeing the divine in everyone and everything fulfills that purpose of life. And in fact, we don't realize the importance of being born as a human being on this planet fully. In fact, when we are born, we get an entry into one of the most exclusive clubs on the planet. And rather, one of the most exclusive clubs in the universe. Because it's only human beings on Earth who have an urge to leave this planet better than we are born with. We have the urge to leave this planet better than the way we arrive here. A mosquito does not feel that I have to leave this world as a better mosquito. And it's doubtful whether even a cat or a dog feels so. But human beings have that urge and also the capacity to evolve to get better while living on this, while living their life on Earth. And for that, no special circumstances are needed, no special type of work is needed. Opportunities can be found by one who is aware of the divine all the time in the type of life that we are living, in the type of work that we are doing. There are enough opportunities to get better and evolve. And that, in fact, is the crux of the life-affirming spiritual philosophy of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. All life is yoga. All life gives us an opportunity for the practice of yoga. Even gods, in other words, do not evolve. They stay as they are. It's only human beings on Earth who have this capacity to evolve, and therefore to be born as a human being is itself a great privilege. We can call it a sort of an entry into one of the most exclusive clubs in the universe. Along with that, we also get an appointment letter that is valid for life. And the extent to which we do what that appointment letter tells us, what is expected of us, is again left to us. We have that free will. But then if we use this free will properly, we can fulfill the purpose for which we came, live better than we arrived at, than the way we arrived here. And along with that, go all the other things that we are looking for, that is joy, peace of mind, and a sense of fulfillment. Now, turning to today's topic, it's about joints, about the places where two bones come together so that movement is possible. And the movement not only is possible, it is by and large smooth, friction-free, and painless. And we take it for granted till we are afflicted with pain in one of the joints. Before I turn to the PowerPoint, let's talk a little bit about the types of movements that are possible. And we'll talk just about a few major ones, because you're not taking an exam in anatomy, and therefore there's no point sort of going into all the variations in movements that are possible. But some of the major ones, yes. Flexion, we have all heard of. Flexion is sort of bending. From that comes, the expression flexing your muscles. So this is flexion. Huh? And the opposite of this is extension. Extension is expanding. So sort of expanding. This is extension, and this is flexion, coming back. Something, like in yoga, we say that every time you fold yourself up, you exhale, and when you expand yourself, inhale. By and large, it would correspond to that. So flexion and extension. It's possible at a very large number of joints, flexion and extension. But along with that, we have other types of movement possible, moving away from the midline or moving towards it, like the shoulder, moving away, coming closer, or like this. Several movements combined. So moving away is abduction, moving towards is adduction. If you remember what abduction is, then one would easily understand the opposite will be adduction. And what is abduction? To abduct is to kidnap, to take away somebody. Yeah? So that's the way one can remember. So moving away is abduction and the opposite is adduction, coming closer. And then we have all types of rotation. And again, the shoulder joint is the one where all this is possible. So rotation. This type of rotation here is called circumduction, going round in circles. So these are some of the major movements that are possible. And now let's see the tools which we have for all these movements, which we can perform so smoothly and easily, and become conscious of what a marvelous sort of feat it is till we are afflicted with pain in one of the joints. So go to the PowerPoint now. So these are our tools. The joints are our tools for friction-free movement. This talk is a part of the course YES.03, which is on health sciences and yoga. And this course and all the other courses and activities of the YES project are a part of the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th anniversary of India's independence. Now, this is an extremely simplified picture of a joint, just to get a little clear about a few things. Now, these are the two bones which are forming this joint, and movement at this joint is possible because of the muscles. And one can understand that the muscle, since it's an organ which can contract and then again relax. When it contracts, its length becomes shorter, and when it relaxes, the length returns to its original longer length. So one can understand that if this muscle contracts, it becomes shorter, it will automatically bring this bone closer to this bone, and that will be a type of flexion. So contraction of this muscle will bring about flexion at this joint. And the attachment of this muscle to the bones is different from the muscle. It's not contractile. It is a tissue that looks white in contrast with the muscle, which is almost red. And this tendon differs from the muscle in the sense that it does not contract, but it has great tensile strength, which means that it can stand a great deal of stretching without breaking. It can bend, but does not break. The way we talked about in the bone, there are those collagen fibers which form that network between which is the hard material deposited. This is something similar to those that network of those fibers with a high tensile strength. So the tendons have that great tensile strength, and the result is that both these ends are very secure. They are very securely attached to these bones, and therefore when the muscle contracts, by and large, these tendons remain undamaged, and they can stretch a bit, but they do not break. Then we have ligaments. Ligaments are like tendons, but there is no muscle associated with the ligaments. Now, these ligaments are also attached to the bones, and they do not contract, but they can stretch and relax. So one can understand that if this muscle contracts and this bone moves this way, the ligament here will get stretched. And when the muscle relaxes and comes back to its original position, this ligament will relax. So one can understand what will happen to the ligament. The opposite will happen to a ligament which will be on this, which may be on this side of the joint. Now, this is something again which has great application in many situations. Say, for example, in back pain, we say we should not, we should be cautious about forward bends. Why? Because the ligaments which bind the joints at the back, they will get stretched when we bend forwards. And when they stretch, they are more likely to break. And any damage which is already there can get further enhanced. And therefore, forward bends are to be avoided. But if we bend backwards, the ligaments would relax. They would not be stretched, they would relax. And that is okay. There's no problem in that. Same applies to the neck. Forward bends, more careful. Backward bends are okay. Now, these ligaments provide a certain degree of stability to the joint, as we can see. And that's possible because these ligaments, like the tendons, again have great tensile strength. And therefore, they don't easily break. Now, this is the picture of a typical joint cut across to show the inside structure. So these are the two bones, bone 1 and bone 2. And then surrounding the joint is a capsule. One can say it's a sort of a packing, a connective tissue packing all around the joint. And then that leaves behind here a cavity. Now, what is there in that cavity? You find that the two surfaces of the bones, which are near each other, have cartilage. It's not bony tissue, it's cartilage. Cartilage is like a cushion. It is a rubbery sort of a tissue. And this padding would help in reducing the friction, and also would avoid the two bones, grating against each other. This cartilage provides that, and also in case of a sudden movement, it will also provide some cushioning. So all these things would be possible because of this soft, rubbery, but at the same time pretty strong material, which is cartilage. Then further, this cavity is filled with a fluid, the synovial fluid, which again has the function of a lubricant. Along with these cushions, that lubrication further adds to reduction in friction and makes the movement smooth. And the synovial fluid comes from two sources. One is the synovial membrane, which secretes into it a substance which is rather viscous, sticky, hyaluronic acid. It's a sticky substance which is viscous. And then there are blood vessels supplying this synovial membrane, from where small amounts of fluid keep leaking out, as happens everywhere in the body. And this fluid that leaks out, this watery fluid, also becomes a part of this synovial fluid. So there's a watery component and there is also a sticky component. On the whole, the material is therefore viscous, somewhat like oil. And one can understand how this would help. Say, if we look at these two cartilages, on the two bones, the articular cartilage, as it is called, because articulation means joining, and this is the cartilage in the joints, so articular cartilage. If these two, this pair of cartilages were to move against each other, there would still be some friction. And if this fluid was only watery, again the movement will not be so good. Imagine two plates of glass. Now, glass is a very smooth, something very smooth, like the cartilage. If you move these two plates of glass against each other, they move quite easily, but still there's some friction. If you wet this glass and then try to move, the movement may become a little smooth, but then they tend to stick to each other. The two plates of glass stick to each other. They cannot be easily separated. And that also is not what is desirable. But if you wet these plates of glass with an oily substance, we say with oil. Then you find not only the movement is friction free, even more free from friction than if they were just wet with water, but then the two plates can also be easily separated. So this allows movement which is friction free, and at the same time, the bones will not tend to stick to each other. These two cartilages, they will not stick to each other during the movement. So in a way, it's like bhakti, devotion that lubricates action or karma in the world. Uh, the action is there, but at the same time, the action does not stick. The action does not stick to you. You don't get attached to the action. So that without that attachment, without getting sticky, that this movement is possible. So a typical joint should allow the wanted movement, should not allow unwanted movements. And this movement should be friction-free, and same time the joint should be protected. And those things are also there. One of the things that protects the joint is, of course, the capsule, but there are other protections also available, which we shall see as we go along. Now, the articular cartilage here reduces friction. It absorbs shocks. Say, suppose you jump from a height, and when you land on the floor, no matter how tactfully you land, say you land on your toes, not on your heels, still the knees have to bear quite a bit of a shock. And that shock gets absorbed because of this articular cartilage. And articular cartilage is smooth and slippery, but does not bind, particularly because of the synovial fluid. And the synovial fluid, the term comes from ovum. As you can see, ovial. Ovial refers to related to the ovum or the egg. And it is so called because this viscous material here resembles the white of an egg in consistency. And that's why this word's synovial. Viscous material, it's a viscous material. At same time, it has water added because of the water oozing out of the capillaries in the synovial membrane. And it also has phagocytes. The synovial fluid also has phagocytes, that is cells which can eat unwanted substances, germs, and etc. And the result is that the functions of this synovial fluid are: it reduces friction, and it performs the functions of blood for the articular cartilage. Since it has material oozing out of the blood vessels here that has nutrients and oxygen, which the cartilage can use, and the carbon dioxide and waste products which the cartilage produces, they can be picked up by this fluid and then returned to the blood, because this fluid is in exchange with the blood, with the capillaries which are supplying the synovial membrane. And this fluid is like that little fluid, which is surrounding every cell of the body. And why that is necessary is because cartilage itself does not have a blood supply. The cartilage doesn't have a blood supply, but it gets its nourishment and oxygen from this fluid in the synovial fluid, and it also dumps its waste products into this synovial fluid. So this functions like blood for the articular cartilage. And if there's any damage and there's debris, or if any germs enter here, then these phagocytes can take care of that. So you can see that the synovial fluid not only is a lubricant, it is also protective. It also has a protective function. Now, why do we need a warm-up before exercise, including yogic practices, especially in the morning? That happens because overnight, the synovial fluid gets more viscous. The viscous component increases, the fluid component decreases, and therefore we feel a little stiff in the morning. And warm-up increases that movement, moves the fluid around, also perhaps increases the blood flow to the joint, and therefore relieves this stiffness. And that's why it's important to start with the warm-up, because staying immobile overnight makes the synovial fluid viscous. And the movement reduces the viscosity and increases the production of the synovial fluid. And from this, we can also understand that the warm-up is therefore more essential in the morning than in the afternoon or evening, because we have been immobile for a long time at night while sleeping, and that is what makes the synovial fluid more viscous. And it's also more important for uh, the elderly than for young people, because in the elderly, in any case, the production of synovial fluid goes down, like all functions decline in an elderly person. The rate at which the synovial fluid is manufactured, that also goes down, and therefore the amount of synovial fluid may be reduced, and therefore morning stiffness is greater and warm-up necessary is also greater in the elderly. Besides immobility, is there anything else that can impair synovial fluid function? And correspondingly, is there something that can help improve synovial fluid function? Yes, apart from immobility, aging is something that impairs synovial fluid function. It reduces its production. And is there something that can improve? Certainly, one can't avoid aging. One can't both live long and not age, but one can slow down the process of aging. And that can be done primarily by two things: exercise, regular physical activity, and massage, regular massage of the body. And both are important. Both of them help by moving the synovial fluid around, and perhaps also by increasing the blood flow to the joint, which in turn would increase the production of synovial fluid. Because we have seen that the synovial fluid is produced as a result of the blood, the filtration from the blood, and it's this filtrate which leaves the capillaries, which passes through the capillaries in the synovial membrane, which becomes a part of the synovial fluid. And the other part, the viscous part, is also secreted by the same membrane. And if it has a better blood flow, it will be able to function better, manufacture a little more synovial fluid. And therefore, exercise and massage are both useful. Regular physical activity, particularly yogic practices, because they do not really spare any joint. There's just about every joint in the body that gets movement if we perform a judiciously selected set of 10 or 15 asanas. We get a top to toe workout. Even Surya Namaskar ends up moving just about every joint in the body. This is something that does not happen in ordinary exercises like jogging or cycling or weightlifting. Now, they may exercise only a few selected joints. The rest of the joints may remain quite unaffected. So that's that's one way in which yogic practices do better than other types of physical activity. Massage, one can go for a professional massage once in a few months, but then perhaps what is more important is to massage oneself, self-massage, because that can be done every day and takes only 10 minutes extra while having a bath. So the bath is not just making the body wet. The bath should include a massage. And the general principle only we'll talk about of the massage. The general principle is that the movements should be gentle, not too tough on the body. And wherever there's a rounded surface like the head or the shoulders, the movement of the hand should be also in circles. Whereas when we are massaging, say, the limbs, the movement should be along the direction of the hair growth. So the hair, grow downwards. So the hand should also move downwards. So during the massage, it moves downwards, then bring it up without actually massaging, and then take it down again as you massage the body. And on this way, spending 10 minutes extra every day during the bath, massaging the body with oil, which oil and so on, again, we'll not go into the details. Probably any oil is better than no oil at all. But sesame oil or til oil is one of the relatively common and oils that are okay. And in summers, when the coconut oil is also fluid, coconut oil is an excellent oil. But then coconut oil cannot be used around the year. And again, Ayurveda experts will tell you that is just as good, because the effects of coconut oil and til oil on the three doshas, Kapha, Pitta, and Vata are different. And nature has sort of provided this arrangement uh, so that we will use the right type of oil in the right season. So coconut oil perhaps in summers is better, and till oil or sesame oil better in the winters when it is fluid. So exercise and massage, these are this is what can help improve synovial fluid function. And one may be able to get away without exercise and massage as a young person, but then the effects start showing up as a person gets older. Of course, never too late to begin. One can start even when the effects have started uh, manifesting, when one finds that the joints have started giving trouble. But then prevention is always better than cure. And therefore, it's better to be conscious in young age and start the process as early as possible. And the benefits would be reaped when one gets older. One will find that the joints will create much less problems. There are people who start getting osteoarthritis at the age of 40, and there are people whose joints move about quite satisfactorily at the 80. Part of the difference is genetic, but also part of the difference is the type of lifestyle they lived from young age onwards. And the two simple things that help a lot are regular physical activity, preferably of the yogic type, yogic practices, and regular massage of the body while having a bath. Now, different types of joints. The hinge joint, as the name suggests, it's like the hinge of a door or a window. And the examples are the knee joint and the elbow joint and the ankle joint. We can see that the movement is possible in only one direction, as in the case of a hinge. And this is a diagrammatic representation. Here is what we may call a ball-like structure, and here is the socket into which it fits. And this ball can rotate in this only in one direction. That is the type of movement which we have at hinge joints, like the knee or the elbow or the ankle. And also the interphalangeal joints, that is the finger joints at the end, where the fingers can be also flexed and extended. Then ball and socket joints. Now here there's truly a ball and a round socket, and therefore movement is possible in several directions. As you can see here. And the two examples are the hip joint and the shoulder joint. The shoulder joint has much greater mobility than the hip joint, but they're both ball and socket type of joints. The picture here is that of the hip joint. And this is the head of the femur or the thigh bone. And this is the acetabulum or the cup or the socket in the pelvis. And the two fit into each other, and it can rotate. The ball can rotate in the socket, giving us the possibility of flexion, extension, adduction, abduction, and circumduction or rotation. Then pivot joints. Here, it's possible to have a rotatory motion around a pivot. And there are two examples shown here. The radioulnar joint, that is the joint between the two bones in the forearm. The forearm has two bones, one which is towards the inside, that is the ulna, and towards the outside, that is the radius. And we find that these two bind to each other like this, and you find that this radius can rotate within this. And that's how we are able to perform this rotatory motion at the elbow. And then this one is between the first two cervical vertebrae, the first two vertebrae in the neck. C1, which is called the atlas, because on this rests the skull. And Atlas, is a character in Greek mythology who carries the globe. And so the head may be compared to the globe, which this vertebra carries, and therefore this vertebra has been named Atlas. And then the atlas also has a hole here through which passes this projection. Uh, this projection is called dens, this projection of the second cervical vertebra. So if this passes through this, one can imagine that it will be possible for this to rotate around this. And that's how we are able to uh, turn the head to the right and the left when we want to say no. Mm. Then this is a saddle joint. The saddle joint is in the thumb. And which part of the thumb? Right at the beginning of the thumb. Between one of these small bones and this longer bone, uh, the metacarpal. And this is like a saddle, like a person sitting on a horse. Uh, Either the rider can move or the horse can move. And that's how you can see that that's how we are able to perform in these movements in the thumb. Other fingers don't have this type of an arrangement, and that's why the movements of the thumb are much more versatile than the movements of the other fingers. Now, which is the joint that has the maximum freedom of movement? And you might have guessed from what we have talked so far, and even through your own personal experience, that the joint that has the maximum freedom of movement is the shoulder joint. And is there any price to be paid for this maximum freedom of movement? Yes, the price to be paid is that this is a joint that is most likely to get dislocated. Dislocation of the shoulder joint is more common than that of any other joint. And what is dislocation? The two bones that are joined to each other, they get dislocated. It means that one of the bones moves away from the place where it was joined, and then it will have to be placed back there again through either manipulation or surgery or whatever, but it has come out of that at least partly. So that is what is dislocation. So there's always a price to be paid for great amount of freedom. Again, sort of turning to yoga, in integral yoga, there is more freedom available than in perhaps any other school of yoga or any other spiritual path. Leave aside religious path, because religions in any case tend to restrict freedom as compared to the spiritual path. But then within these paths, these yogic or spiritual disciplines, integral yoga offers maximum freedom. And therefore, the chances of getting dislocated or derailed are also greater here. For example, if there is, as is quite common in many parts of this type, the person is told that, well, if you've chosen the spiritual path, say goodbye to the rest of the world, change your dress, start wearing white or saffron robed clothes. And after that, you said goodbye. So don't think of the family. Tell the family, I will not contact you. You will not contact me. And I have chosen a different type of path. I have nothing to do with you anymore. Now that is simple. But then in integral yoga, you don't have to do that. That relationship has to change in spirit, which means that what the mother has said, our relationship should now be that of egoless kindness and goodwill. Egoless, because ego is the root of attachment. So it will be free from attachment. But at the same time, you continue to be kind and you continue to have goodwill. That is how you express their love, your love for even your earlier relationships, including the family, without getting attached. So the love does not finish, love does not end, but this is love without attachment, expressed through egoless kindness and goodwill. Now, that is ideal. But at the same time, it may be difficult to practice for the seeker. Leave aside the family who will not understand and will feel that, well, if it is possible for you, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you visit us more often? Why don't you spend more time with us? And so on and so forth. So when you have great freedom available, then the chances of getting dislocated are also much greater. Now we turn to the shoulder joint. which has this freedom of maximum movement. It's the joint between this hollow or cup-shaped socket in the shoulder blade, which can be felt nicely at the back, and the ball of the humerus or the arm bone. And this is the collarbone or the clavicle, which comes and joins a projection from the shoulder blade. And this can be also felt at the back, this union between the end of this collarbone and this projection from the shoulder blade that can also be felt at the back. Now, why this joint has a great freedom of movement is because this cup-like cavity in the shoulder blade is relatively hollow. And that's why this great freedom of movement is possible. There's nothing much no bony projection or anything to stop it. And this being hollow, this being shallow, this hollow being shallow, the movement, much greater freedom of movement is available. But that is also the reason why this ball can get easily dislocated from this socket. However, it doesn't happen too often because there are plenty of ligaments and other structures surrounding it. And you can get some view of it here, the front view of the shoulder joint. And you can see that here, the joint, and then how many ligaments are there around it. All these ligaments, you see, ligaments here, ligaments here, ligaments here. And so you have plenty of these ligaments binding it from all around, and that's what keeps it in shape, keeps the joint intact most of the time, except when there is a severe trauma. Now, which is the largest and the most complex joint in the body? Again, if you think a little, you would realize that the largest joint is the knee joint, and it's also the most complex. And in fact, the knee joint is a marvel of engineering. Just think of what all it lets us do. It lets us walk or run in the plains and over the hills. We can go down or up a steep incline in a hill, and also walk up and down steps in a staircase. We can go upstairs and downstairs. All these movements are possible at the knee joint, and that is possible because of the way it is constructed, and it is a weight-bearing joint. The weight of almost the entire body rests on the two knees, and that too in the erect posture, which in terms of gravity would exert a lot of pressure on the knee joint. Now, this is the basic knee joint, the bones involved, the thigh bone or the femur, and one of the two bones in the leg, the tibia, which has these two places where it can join, and corresponding to that are these two protuberances in the thigh bone. So this is where the basic hinge joint of the knee is. But then in front of it, there is a small little bone, the kneecap, the patella. Now, here are just three views shown here, and you don't have to worry about which structure is. But the idea behind showing this is that the knee joint is one of those joints which is packed with a lot of ligaments and other structures which keep it strong, at the same time leave the movement friction-free. Now, here in the superficial view, you can see the kneecap and a tendon coming from one of the major muscles in the front of the thigh, inserted here, and then a tendon starting from the patella and going down to the shin bone, and then you have other ligaments here. If you look at, if you cut open a little and see deeper, you can see the cartilage here, and lots of other ligaments, again, keeping this intact. And particularly marked with these stars are two ligaments, which you might have heard of, the anterior cruciate ligament, or the ACL, and the posterior cruciate ligament, or the PCL. ACL tear and PCL tear, which are sometimes seen in athletes, are in these ligaments. And they're called cruciate because they have a cross-like, arrangement. They start from one side of one of the bones, go and get attached to the other side. So they are like a cross, and that's why cruciate. So anterior cruciate and posterior cruciate ligaments. And in knee injuries, it is one of these two ligaments that is quite often torn or damaged. And then you have these menisci, the medial meniscus and the lateral meniscus. These are also pieces of cartilage, but then you can say they are like discs. So one disc here and one disc here, one of them almost complete, one of them not so complete, but all the same, they are basically discs. Discs of cartilage, which we have seen is a smooth rubbery substance with great tensile strength, and which can sort of provide good padding. And then if we look at the back, once again, you find a very large number of ligaments binding the knee joint to keep it stable. Now, this sort of shows you through a section, looking at it from the side, some of the major sort of things which are reducing the friction in the knee joint and providing protection. Because the number of such structures which you have in the knee joint, you don't have anywhere else. And that is what makes this joint more complex. And that complexity is there because the complexity is necessary. The complexity is very meaningful. Now, friction is being reduced here by the articular cartilage, as happens at every joint. So this is the articular cartilage. The synovial fluid, which is filled in the joint cavity. And these two menisci, one of them, the lateral meniscus, that's towards the outside, shown here, these discs of cartilage, and then tendon sheaths, which are not shown here, that is surrounding the tendons. Again, there is a sheath, and in that narrow space, again, there is a fluid between the tendon and that sheath, and that further reduces the friction. And then in bursa, what is that bursa? Bursa is a sort of a sac-like pad, and you have one here and one here, one above the patella, one below the patella, and then a fat pad here. In this space, there's a pad which is fatty in nature, full of fatty material. And protection is being provided by this bursa here and this bursa here. To some extent, you guess the patella itself protects the knee joint. The patella itself may get damaged, but at least the knee will be spared. And further, the patella itself is being protected by this bursa here, and by the ligaments, as at every joint, a large number of ligaments which bind. Something like this, you see, something precious is being packed. Then you think of all the material that can be used. On one hand, you want to tie it up nicely so that the packet is very secure. So you use a lot of ropes and whatever, tape and whatever. So, you use a variety of materials for protecting it, for keeping it secure. You may use rope, you may use tape, you may use a variety of materials. You may use more than one type of material to make it secure. But same time, if inside the box is some fragile material, then you also fill it with packing material. And you may use a variety of packing material depending upon what is more appropriate for what purpose, and you may use a mixture of them. You may use, somewhere you may use cotton, and where you may use thermocol, and some places a bubble wrap, and some places foam, and some places just shredded pieces of paper. Now, this is all different types of packing material so that fragile stuff does not break. So here again, we find the same strategy being used for packing up the joint so that it is secure, and at the same time, also providing a variety of mechanisms so that the movement is friction free. Now, the difference between the box that we pack with fragile material and the knee joint is that the box does not have to move. Here we have to allow for movement and yet provide the same type of stability as well as protection to fragile structures. Now we turn to some of the injuries which are common at the joints as a result of traumatic trauma, say for example in sports or even otherwise. Now there are two terms which one can distinguish between sprain and strain. The most common example of a sprain is what results from the twisting of the ankle. And this generally leads to the damage of some ligaments. Damage can vary from a little damage to a major tear in some of the ligaments, but the bones are usually not dislocated. On the other hand, strain is a damage to the muscles, not to the ligaments. Although tendons may be damaged, the tendon attached to the muscle may be damaged. And this results from a sudden and powerful contraction of a muscle. And of this, I have personal experience at the age of around 40. That is the time this type of injuries are most common also. Because, you are aging and yet you do not feel it. The process of aging is so slow that till the age of 40, the person does not feel that the aging has begun. And as I used to do quite commonly, jog and then take the first step suddenly and very fast. And when I did that once at the age of about 40, I felt as if I was hit on the calf by a pebble. And I thought maybe there was some pebble on the road and that had come and hit me. But actually it was not the pebble that had hit. It was the tearing of a muscle inside, the tearing of the calf muscle inside, which had done it. And the muscles can get damaged. They can get torn. And if the muscle gets torn, still it is much better than if the tendon gets torn, because the same type of a sudden and powerful contraction of the muscle may sometimes lead to the tearing of the tendon. And why the damage to the tendon or to the ligaments is more serious than damage to the muscle is because tendons and ligaments have poor blood supply. And therefore, their healing is very slow, unpredictable, and seldom complete. And therefore, how long it will take cannot be easily predicted. In case of bone, it is very simple. The fracture takes about 3 to 4 months, and one can predict more or less with certainty that the fracture will heal, the bone will become as good as new in a period of 3 to 4 months. In case of muscles, a little less predictable, but all the same, still much better than in tendons and ligaments. In case of tendons and ligaments, one cannot be sure. And even after the healing has taken place, it is seldom complete. Because what happens is that during the process of repair, the ligament or the tendon does not get replaced by the same type of material, the same type of fibers, which have great tensile strength. Instead, the continuity is restored by connective tissue, that is packing material, which is not strong, which doesn't have the same tensile strength. And therefore, the person remains vulnerable to injury at the same place once again. And that's why sometimes one wonders that this injury was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and why is it that with just a little extra effort or a little accident, I got the injury again, and it's exactly at the same place where it was 10 years ago. That happens, that memory is retained because that healing was never really complete. That healing was by the formation of connective tissue, not by the formation of new ligament or a new tendon. So the continuity was restored. One feels that one is all right, but at the same time, one is not completely all right. One has to be careful with that spot throughout life. So that is what the damage to the ligaments and tendons is, why it's the worst. Muscles, a little better, and bone, almost sure to heal completely and in a predictable time, because the blood flow to the bone is much better than to the muscles, and the blood flow to the muscles is much better than to the tendons and ligaments. And that's why this difference in the healing capacity and the time taken to heal. Now, by and large, what is the treatment? We'll not go into the details of the treatment of sprains and strains, but as a general principle, the sooner one does some cold fomentation after a sprain or strain, it is better. Why? Because not only the ligaments or tendons or muscles are damaged, the blood vessels in these structures also get damaged. And when the blood vessels get damaged, there's bleeding, and that blood collects inside. And the more the blood collects inside, the more the region will have to work on clearing the debris. And therefore, the first priority is to check this bleeding, to reduce this bleeding so that less blood collects there, which will reduce the pain as well as reduce the amount of work to be done in the process of healing to clear the debris itself. And one simple way to reduce the blood flow there is to use a cold pack. A cold pack, ice cold pack, but not for a very long time, maybe 15-20 minutes or so. And then one can leave the place without that cold pack and repeat it after an hour or two for another 10 or 15 minutes. And this is most helpful. The sooner it is done after the injury, the better, because one can understand that the bleeding has started at the time of injury. After that, in any case, the bleeding will keep getting less as time goes on through the natural process of clotting, etc. But to reduce the blood flow immediately, it's better to apply the cold pack. The sooner, the better. Cold pack is of some use in the first 24 hours, maybe of a little use up to 48 hours, but after 48 hours, it's of no use. After 48 hours, what is more useful is a hot pack, hot fomentation. Why? Because that increases the blood flow, and increase in the blood flow is what we need for healing. So as a general principle, apply cold during the first 24 hours, the sooner the better, and hot fomentation 48 hours after the injury. That is the general principle of this type of soft tissue injuries, as they are called. Soft tissue because bone is the hard tissue. So compared to the hard tissue, an injury to a muscle or a tendon or a ligament is a soft tissue injury. And these soft tissue injuries don't even show on an X-ray. They don't show on an X-ray. It's only the bony fractures which show on an X-ray, not the damage to the muscles, tendons, and ligaments. What is the effect of aging on the joints? The production of this lubricating fluid, synovial fluid, is reduced. The articular cartilage becomes thinner, and ligaments shorten and become less flexible. So you can see in general a decline in all types of functions, which is understandable with aging. But then the process of aging can be slowed down through regular physical activity, through proper nutrition, through a healthy lifestyle as a whole. And what are the consequences of these? The most common is osteoarthritis. There are very few people above the age of 70 who do not show at least some osteoarthritic changes on an X-ray. And age-related degenerative changes in the spine, in the vertebral column, in the spine appear as the hunched over posture. That's because of the reduction in the space between individual vertebrae. The discs become narrower, and they become narrower more in the front than towards the back, and that's how it leads to a hunched over posture. One tends to bend forwards, have a hump at the back. And we have seen that having that proper space provided by the intervertebral discs is important to let the nerves come out of the vertebral column. So this not only leads to a poor posture, it can also increase pressure on the nerve roots, which may show up as pain, which may show up as weakness in a limb, and so on. But the most common consequence is osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis is partly aging and partly wear and tear. Now, wear and tear is a tricky thing, because if one does not use a joint, there will be no wear and tear. But then if one does not use a joint, the muscles will grow weak, and that doesn't mean that the person will be protected from disease. So how much exertion and what type of exertion therefore becomes important. Certainly, there's no question of not using the joint at all. Expose the joint to unnecessary trauma, which does not give corresponding amount of exercise or physical activity. For example, while walking, one should not be stamping the foot on the floor, the way a soldier might, or a child might while throwing a temper tantrum. No, not that is the type, not the type of movement which will help the joints, and it will not give any exercise either. So, as in the general principle is use it or lose it. That applies to the brain, and that also applies to all the parts of the body. We should continue using them, but then use them with understanding, and that will reduce the wear and tear while the joint is still being used. And if it is used, the synovial fluid production will continue at a good pace. And along with that exercise, if we also massage the joints, massage the body, that will further reduce the effects of wear and tear. Now, what contributes to this wear and tear is not just using the joints, but also aging and genetic factors, and therefore osteoarthritis tends to run in families. The most commonly affected joint is the knee, and next most commonly affected is the hip. Now, this is in contrast with rheumatoid arthritis, in which it is the small joints in fingers, etc., that are affected. In osteoarthritis, it is mainly the big joints like the knees and the hips that are affected. And because of the effects of aging, the cartilage is thin and worn out and can have some damage. And the result of this cartilage thinning is that the two bones which are joined to each other in the joint start rubbing against each other. That is painful. That produces a grating sensation that introduces friction into the movement. And one of the responses of this type of trauma to the bone, because of inadequate cushioning by the cartilage and the synovial fluid, is that bony spurs may develop. That is, extra bone may develop on the sides, which is unwanted. It's a protective response on the part of the bone, but actually it makes the movement painful. Some of these spurs may grow into muscles, and therefore the movement becomes more and more restricted and painful. Sometimes to look at what is going on in the joint in case of osteoarthritis, and even more commonly in case of injuries which might have led to the tear of the anterior cruciate ligament or posterior cruciate ligament, the doctor takes a look into the joint, and that is called arthroscopy. In arthroscopy, what is done is a thin tube is introduced through a very small hole into the joint, and at the tip of that tube is a light and a camera. And at the other end of this tube, the doctor can then see inside the joint and see exactly what has happened inside. And at the same sitting, if he finds that some manipulation, some surgery can repair the damage, they repair that injury, he can sometimes do that also. So it's both, can be not just diagnostic, it can also be therapeutic. Means the treatment can also be done while the arthroscopy is going on, because the doctor can see exactly what has happened to which meniscus or ligament, and if surgical correction is possible, then that can be done at the same sitting while looking through the same tube, because the doctor has a clear view of it. So with minimum invasion, without doing open surgery of the whole joint, one can do certain types of repairs. It's something like laparoscopic surgery. In the abdomen also, with through a small hole, one can do quite a bit of surgery instead of opening up the abdomen. So the trend is towards minimally invasive surgery. That is minimum invasion and yet doing the surgery. And that has become possible because now we have these tubes which have a light and a camera at the tip, so that the doctor can get a good view of what is inside, can approach the inside with fine surgical tools without opening up the whole thing. You might have sometimes reflected upon why some eating places are called eating joints. It's eating place is not just a place for refueling. An eating place can also serve as a place around which people can talk and share joys and sorrows, share what happened during the day, share ideas and opinions, discuss issues. Conversations flows more smoothly while you eat. And therefore, eating, is one of the things which is often used uh, in offices, etc. Also business places also, to sort of ease the relationship, to make the relationship more informal so that conversation flows more freely. Conversation becomes friction free. So friction free, frank, candid conversation flows smoothly while we eat. And that's perhaps why these are called eating joints. So essentially, a joint is a smooth relationship. And what applies to the smooth relationship to joints, if one reflects, applies quite a bit also to human relationships. And they become smooth through the same process, the same type of friction reducing and protective mechanisms as we find in the joints. So the type of relationship which two bones have in a joint is for us also a lesson for life. I'd like to express my gratitude for the pictures as well as for a lot of learning that has come from this book, Principles of Anatomy and Physiology by Tortora and Grabowski. This is a picture postcard view of Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch, the place where I live and work and the place from where I'm speaking. If you have any questions or comments, please drop us an email on yes@yesspirituality.com. Gratitude to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for making these sessions possible. And thank you all for being there. Any questions now?
There's just few in the chat box. The first is there a list of the 15 asanas that you referred to in your lecture?
Yes, you can go to the course Yes.01. There's a playlist on our YouTube channel. Yes.01 Practicals. That is the playlist. In that, you'll find, as you go from the first day to the fifth day, number of 15 to 20 asanas building up. In that we have followed a graded approach. On day one, relatively fewer practices and only the simpler ones. And then we have built up to a respectable number and also a set which is by and large quite safe, at the same time very good for keeping yourself fit up to the fifth session. And if you see that, you'll get the entire list from there. Basically, we have some postures in every position. So starting with the warm-up and Surya Namaskar, we've gone on to the lying down postures, lying down on the back. Lying down on the back is what we call supine. In the hand also, this is supination, this is pronation. So when you lie down on the back like this is supine. The hand is supine in the same way the back can be supine. So postures in that. And then we have sitting postures. And then we have postures while lying down prone, that is on the tummy. And then we have pranayamas. And of course, we end with a long shavasana. That is the sequence.
Right. Okay. Next in the same line is you referred to sesame oil in winters and coconut oil in summer for massage, not mustard oil.
Well, mustard oil is acceptable, but somehow in Ayurvedic circles have found that they don't favor mustard oil that much. Of course, they have some specialized medicated oils also and mixtures of oils, but how far that is necessary going into that complexity, I'm not sure. But sesame and coconut, I have found nobody speaking against them by and large.
What causes hyperextension of the knee?
It's a sort of an accidental or could be deliberate, but accidental extra effort, because the knee is not supposed to be hyperextended. It can extend, but then the movement should stop because there are mechanisms to lock the knee in that position, not letting it go beyond that. That we have also at the elbow. You can take the elbow only up to this point. You can't take it further back. So both at the elbow and the knee, the hinge is supposed to work up to a point, and beyond that, it will not go. Any other questions? Divya has raised her hand, seems.
Yeah, I had a question. Is the elbow joint same as the knee joint? The movement is very similar, right?
Yes, the movements are similar, but the knee joint is much more complex. And secondly, at the elbow joint, we also have this rotation possible, you see, because of which we can move the hand like this. We don't have that type of movement possible because there's a joint between the radius and the ulna, as we saw, a pivot type of joint. So that's why this type of rotation of the forearm is possible.
Okay, so it's a pivot, and which other
So
movement?
there are two joints you can see here. One is between the arm bone and the radius, which is the hinge joint. And then we have a joint between the radius and the ulna, which is a pivot joint.
Okay. And what is your take on recently? I mean, it's been there for quite a few years. A lot of people go in for hip replacement and knee replacement. What is your take on that?
Well, I'm not an expert to be able to give the best opinion on this, but certainly I have seen people's lives change dramatically after this type of surgery. So if the disability is such that it is not only painful, but also restricting the life of the person considerably, making the movement painful and therefore making it very difficult to person to move around. This surgery does give a lot of relief. And but of course, that again is for a limited period of time. The replaced joint can also get worn out. And therefore, in older people, it may not matter because but in younger people who have a long life to look forward to, it may require another surgery later. That's possible. So we basically, what it comes to is that we should try our best to delay the aging process as much as possible. Then maybe we will not need this type of a replacement at all, or we will need it so late that we'll need it only once.
Thank you.
Right. Next question is, for some people, legs become round, tibia. Is the bone that's bending, or is it because of the knee joint?
Well, I would guess it's probably primarily the bone. And the very obvious examples that you have are in children who have rickets. Their legs are bent like this. And that happens because there is not enough vitamin D and therefore not enough calcium absorption, and therefore not enough of the hard material in the bone. So if the bony framework is there, which is basically protein material, if that bony framework is there, but it has not been sufficiently reinforced with that hard material, the concrete, you might say, then what happens is that the material which has tensile strength, that framework is there, but it has not been made rigid by the hard material which fills up the spaces. And that's what leads to this bending. And corresponding to this, to some extent, it could happen, perhaps it also in adults, but in children, it's very obvious in the case of rickets. On the other hand, if basically it's protein depletion, then the rigid framework is there. Therefore, the bone remains straight and rigid, but it becomes weak because this bony framework itself has this framework of tensile material that itself has become depleted. That can happen either in osteoporosis because of age, or it can happen because of long-term steroid therapy. Then, the bone is rigid, but because it is not sufficiently, doesn't have sufficient fibers of which have great tensile strength, the bone becomes more fragile, and therefore it's more likely to have a fracture.
Sir, further to this ricket question, is it possible that if any of the parents suffer rickets during their childhood, is it possible that that their children might get this deformed bones, not specifically they like contracting rickets from them, but is it possible that the structure of the bones of particularly the legs are changed?
No, I don't think so, because nutritional deficiencies are not directly passed on to the children. And even if the bones are deformed, that will not lead to deformed bones in the child, because child's development of the child's bones will still express the genes of the parents, not the way the parents are at the moment.
Okay, thank you, sir.
It might lead to, say, deformation of the pelvis and make childbirth difficult, but it will not lead to deformed limbs in the child.
Okay, thank you so much.
In the same lines, why does knee buckle while walking?
Well, I mean, I really don't even fully understand what the buckling of the knees is, but
It's like I had that condition long back. While walking, all of a sudden your knee would just bend, and I would tend to fall easily. Never knew what was the cause of it. It just went away on its own. But I was just curious to understand what could have been the reason.
I really won't be able to say. I mean, what did your doctors tell you?
Nothing much. It was like just probably do a little bit of knee exercise. That's about it. But there's no medicine or anything given.
You have some sort of structural weakness, which one can understand can be due to a variety of reasons and a variety of weaknesses. You saw how complex the knee joint is.
Mhm.
And then at the same time, exercise does help. That's a good point you brought out, because the muscles around the joint are also a type of protection, apart from all the other protection that we talked about. And that is one reason why the pain in osteoarthritis is more at night than during the day, because at night the muscles are totally relaxed, and therefore that protection provided by the muscles is gone. And therefore, correspondingly, if there's any type of problem, including pain in the knees, strengthening those muscles helps the pain. You don't have to do anything to the joint directly, just strengthening the muscles itself helps. And that is how physiotherapy helps, because physiotherapy strengthens the muscles. And forget about physiotherapy. I've seen at least one person who asked me, and I told him the only thing that I knew and could tell him about what to do for the osteoarthritis of the knees. I told him that you do those exercises which we do as a warm-up, taking the leg straight and then bringing it back like this, the thighs. So during the warm-up, we have movement of the knees, going like this, correspondingly in the leg. So you perform those movements. Normally in the warm-up, we do it, say, 5 times. I told him to do it 10 times because you have a problem with the knees, and do it not once a day, but thrice a day. So 10 times this type of movement as we do in the warm-up, and do it thrice a day. And interestingly, he said that the pain disappeared. And I told him that you don't have to worry what time you do it, because for this type of exercise, this much exercise, fasting or empty stomach is not necessary. So you can do it any time of the day, just do it thrice a day, 10 times every time. And the pain, he said, disappeared.
Thank
you. Does sleeping in AC increase joint pain?
Yes, it does, because in cold environment, the blood flow is reduced. And that could be one explanation. But yes, certainly it is a common observation that all muscle and joint related pains increase in cold environment, whether that cold is because of air conditioning or otherwise. And therefore, to protect oneself, keep oneself warm, does help. And this is particularly important if one had an injury to some part of the body. I told you, I mean, I had an injury to the calf muscles at the age of about 40, and it took a few months to recover. It recovered completely, but then I was told that you'll have to be careful throughout because otherwise this pain will persist throughout life. So be careful in winters. So what I did for several years was to use socks which covered the entire calf also on that leg. The moment it started getting a little cold, when the season changed towards the cold, I used that type of socks on that leg for several years.
For kids, the scapula is protruding out, is visible a lot from the back. Is this normal?
What is
Scapula is protruding out, is visible a lot from the back. Is this normal for kids?
No, it's I think more related to the to how much fat tissue the person has. In very thin persons, it shows in children as well as adults. If one puts on a little weight, then it becomes less prominent. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Scapula does show quite well in children as well as adults, those who are very thin.
Should massage be done before using soap or after during a bath?
Well, again, I have seen opinions on that vary quite a bit. Firstly, I mean, using soap every day is not essential. So basically, the question is not so much before soap or after soap. The question is before water or after water. If you go for a therapeutic massage, they apply oil first. I mean, therapeutic means like a professional massage, say of the Ayurvedic type, what they call abhyang. If you go for that, they first apply oil, then let you have a hot water shower so that washes the oil away, and then you can wipe the body. Perhaps one can do that also during the bath. But sometimes it is also suggested that you first wet the body, then apply a little bit of oil all over. Perhaps then, it's easier to apply and faster because the friction is much less. And then you have a little bath again to wash off this and wipe the body. So, but by and large, I don't see anything wrong with applying the oil and then having a bath. Bath without oil, sorry, without soap, bath without the soap. Too much of soap doesn't do too much good. It only washes away the natural oils on the skin, natural oils, which are not only keeping it oily, but also protective in nature.
How much time should one spend in the sun to get adequate vitamin D?
Well, that would be difficult to say, but from what I can vaguely sort of remember is that even 1 hour is more than enough if one is exposing sufficient surface area of the body. And what time that 1 hour should be, again, I mean, in winters, one will be able to do it. In summers, it will be difficult. And in winters, again, said that morning sun is kinder to the skin than the afternoon sun. But then it depends upon what time one is able to do it. And one doesn't have to do it only for vitamin D. Even otherwise, it's nice to get a little fresh air and sunshine if possible.
And that's all for the question answers in the chat box.
Any other question?
No, there are no more questions. So maybe we can just close today's session with a moment of silence and meet tomorrow for next. Thank you.
Thank you.